Good morning, good people, and welcome to the PooleProof Wisdom podcast conversations. We're back. Life happened and needed attending to, and after a break, I'm back with a guest and a topic that I think will have meaning to us all. Now, usually, when anyone introduces a guest, the safest and simplest way to do it is to read off the person's name, their company, and their occupation. In Larry Gioia's case, however, that would just be confusing. Larry doesn't just have one company and one occupation. He's curious, active, and involved in a lot of different things, and reading them all off would take quite a while. I met Larry when I worked for a healthcare technology company, and he was with PwC, where he remains a senior director in the company's product and technology practice. Larry and others were brought in to help the company through a transformational period, leveraging knowledge and expertise that he had with companies around the globe. But while I respected that aspect of who he was, it was during the conversations around other topics that I most leaned in and paid attention to what he had to say, because he was speaking a language I knew very well, the language of humanity first. So, back to that introduction. The smartest and best way to introduce Larry is to tell you about the two expansive concepts he always has on his mind. One is the broad range of possibilities for the future, and the other is the surprising power that can be harnessed when people are invested in each other. Of all the vocational labels you could apply, Larry's really a tech savvy, human oriented futurist, and all of his various positions as a consultant, entrepreneur, and investor would really only serve to illustrate that point. He puts his money where his mouth is, encouraging us all to imagine what's coming, but not to lose sight of what makes us human. That's why, when I conceived today's topic, I couldn't think of anyone I wanted to speak with about it more. The future of happiness, you see, given our human experience of late, is important to consider. Happiness and what it means has changed. The challenge is learning how to change ourselves so that we can still access it. This one's going to make you really think, good people. And if it doesn't, you really should be wondering why. In particular, guided by recent research published by a team of psychologists at the University of Missouri Columbia, you should be working hard to understand why happiness isn't always what we think it is or found where we think it should be. Nope. There is compelling evidence that our own happiness is, in significant part, influenced by the kindness and generosity we show others. Imagine that. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Good morning, Larry, and welcome to the PooleProof Wisdom podcast. I'm so pumped that you could join us today. How are you?
Good. I'm well, my friend. Good to see you. Good to hear you. And good morning, good afternoon from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Pittsburgh. Oh boy, you've got lots on your plate, I'm sure. So, Larry, it's been a while since you and I have spoken. And in my intro of you, what I said primarily is that even though my first engagement with you was as a consultant for a company I worked with, that there was always something more about you than what you did in that particular role. It's a humanity first kind of philosophy that I was able to pick up on, and I think many others picked up on as well. And so I was thinking about this next episode, and right now in the world, people are so focused on what's happening, they're forgetting, I think, what's possible. And I'm a proponent of living your life to pursue happiness and the ways that we go about that. And given some of the things that I learned from you, heard from you, saw from you before, I thought you could give some really interesting insights on this from your futuristic perspective, but also just in terms of your personal perspective when it comes to pursuing happiness. Are you good with that?
I'm great with that, and I'm sincerely humbled by your very kind words and observations, which I must say, Charles, are truly reciprocated. So I'm so glad we could reconnect in this capacity outside of work, and I great looking forward to catching up with you as I catch up on what you've been up to. So this is
Oh
fantastic.
my, well, that's a book in work right there. So
I know.
let's talk about happiness in particular. We are coming into what is it, 18 or 19 months now of, pandemic related activity, and the world has turned upside down, twisted sideways, and done it backwards again. people don't seem to have any foundation of what is important because they're basing everything on what's happening to them. Now, I come from a perspective that says the happiness is a choice. I believe that it's not something that you can expect. It's not something that someone deserves. It's something that you choose, and the way you go about pursuing it is important. In light of where we are today, how is happiness accessible to people at that level, given all that they're focused on beyond being happy?
Yeah, we can unpack that a little bit. So I love the way you framed it, which is, happiness is a choice. I couldn't agree with that more. I think there's also a facet, Charles, which is happiness is also something that we can actually create, and we can actually we create and we flourish around us by, frankly, from my perspective, the people we surround ourselves with, right? And I think that's something that you're a champion of as well, is that we surround ourselves with people who maybe don't share the same maybe backgrounds, or the same interests, or frankly the same school of thought. But frankly, my happiness, and it comes a lot from who I spend time with and share space with and share ideas with and listen to, right? So I'll come full circle to, I think we can really create happiness in our lives by focusing on who we spend time with. I would say similarly, Charles, in my own last 18 months, so much of my own happiness has come from taking a step back and doing a lot of reflection, as I know many people have, with regards to what does it mean to spend time, and in this case, be a father. I've got two boys since we last spoke. I had one then, but I've got two now.
Wow.
And spending a lot of time with my family, Charles, and the benefit of being home now. I was very, very happy then. And I'm even more happy now being able to spend time with my kids and spend time with my wife and bring that to everything that I do. And Charles, taking that own happiness and then putting that back into the world, maybe something we'll talk about today. How do we take the things that we love and share that back outward to everyone around us to the extent that we can, and together make the world a better place?
And that brings up for me the idea that so often people see happiness in ways that are much more tangible things, outward expressions of it, identifications with success. Now, you're a successful guy. Now, I know you're humble, so you won't say that. So, audience, that's me saying that, because Larry would never say that about himself. But you're successful, you have your health, you have, a good life. But throughout all of that, one of the things I will tag back again is that when I got to meet you and got to know you a little bit, those many years ago when we were working together at the previous company, you were always driven to do more. I call it putting more good back into the world than I take from it. What made you get there? And tell me how, for you, along with what you just said about family and the people who are in your life, how that defines happiness for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to be cliche, but, like you, I think it was kind of our own personal connection, and this human connection that we had is we never talked about it when we were in that capacity. But like you, I saw that in you too. And I think that's why we are having this conversation, right? So for me, I was always raised from a very young age to not just, do unto others, be kind. But I think what's important there that's carried through my personal life, Charles, my work life, and all the things in between, is the really important part of expecting nothing in return. And that's carried with me so much. And whether that's, whether it's in this case, a client experience where it's like, hey, I really just want to do this because I want my clients to be happy. I want the overall experience for this project, for example, to be a good outcome, but I don't expect anything in return. And I think that idea is really important because so many people, I think, unfortunately, are seeking happiness by doing that, right? By putting good things out there. But in the back of their mind, I think there's some expectation like, hey, but like, what do I get out of this, right? And this kind of quid pro quo thing. So there's happiness there, but for me, it's always been rooted, Charles, in giving first and having no expectation of anything in return. And I say that because, admittedly, I was the guy who was starting not a career, but starting kind of this whole like, hey, I'm going to give. But there was always something in the back of my mind that I was disappointed when I didn't get anything back, right? And it didn't have to be a tangible thing. But when I gave and continued to give, whether that's time, energy, dollars, having conversations like this when I expected nothing, I became much happier because I saw the energy that created. I saw it either in the individual that I was speaking to, the teams that I was working with, the teams they were working with, it's this manifestation thing, right? That like you, that creates a lot of energy for me, and that's kind of just who I am. So this whole idea of giving first, no expectation, Charles, has been kind of a foundation for how I look to create my own happiness and ideally inculcate that in other people. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does. And the thing that goes with that, though, is it sounds wonderful, but it's not easy all the time.
It's not easy.
So,
No,
how do you find
yes.
the path to doing it? Because you're coming up against a lot of roadblocks, right? I mean, we're living in a time where, despite what technology is supposed to do to bring us together, it's pushing people further apart because of a variety of reasons. People are unhappy with everything. I mean, I kind of shun even tuning into timelines anymore because I don't want to see another person losing their shit on an airplane. So we've got all of this going on. We've got the mask wars, the vaccination war. Little things that shouldn't be issues are, I think, reflective of the times in which we're living because people are not happy with anything, particularly themselves. So how does someone like you find the path to doing that amidst all of these circumstances where you could just join the bandwagon and say, well, hell, I'm not going to be happy either. How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, so again, there's so many things moving in the world right now. All the things that you alluded to, and then some. I think part of this comes to like okay, what's the secret? Well, there is no secret. For me, Charles, it was just starting to do it, and do it in a, dare I say, engineered way. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not authentic. It actually is authentic, but what I say by engineered is like I'm going to commit daily. And I have committed daily for the past, dozens of years of being a working professional, to say every day I'm going to do something that someone doesn't expect. And that can come by way of a compliment. It can come by way of just a simple thank you or a smile. And we hear about these things often, but what I'm saying to you is, and your listeners, is just commit to do it, whatever it is. It could be like, hey, every day I'm going to say hi to somebody. I'm going to meet somebody new. I'm going to compliment somebody. Those little, what I kind of call micro nudges for the self, become muscle memory over time. So I literally started doing that. As I alluded to a second ago, I was the guy early on, in my career who was always about kind of like, hey, I'm going to do this, but I kind of want the thing in exchange.
Right.
It wasn't working because like I said, I was disappointed. And then it began to kind of, for myself, to say, okay, what if I experimented? What if I could experiment and say, I'm going to do something, but expect nothing, but I'm going to promise and commit to myself. I'm going to do this every single day. And when I started doing that, like a whole different world opened. I started meeting new people. People started reaching out to me. People started asking me what I'm doing. And like, I'm not doing anything that's that miraculous or magical here, Charles. I think it's part of the magic of this conversation is just reminding people that there's lots of good in the world. And when you believe it, you see it, right? It's one of the mantras of one of my very dear friends. It comes back to pink socks. That, you and I shared that experience together.
Yeah.
Right? I say that because if you just commit to yourself to do it.
Right.
So that's the kind of tactics that I'm taking. And I guess when you do that, like anything, it becomes muscle memory. It doesn't become an engineered thing anymore. It becomes a daily routine. It becomes part of your own ethos of who you are. And for me, I guess, part of the reason we've been having this conversation is, you saw that in me, I saw that in you. We kind of had this shared moment of like, hey, we just believe there's good in the world. And the next thing, Charles, I would say is that when you get to a point where you're doing that, it doesn't feel like it just happens, right? Like it's just a moment in time. You're just out and about and you're like saying hi to somebody or smiling at somebody. Right. You never know where it's going to go, right? So again, for me, long-winded answer, Charles, is going to be just do it, try it, experiment, see what works for you, because giving back is creating happiness. You got to do what's right for you, because what works for you, Charles, and works for me may not work for somebody else. Right. It's got to work for you and who you are.
And that goes to this point about choice that you and I were talking about. So there was a recent, I didn't think it was in the last several months. I'm not sure of time because time is no longer something I can relate to. Everything is the same amount of time. But there was a recent report by researchers at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and their conclusion was that the best way to be happy involves helping others. That's a very important idea because we often think of happiness as an individualized thing, and we think about it in terms of how it makes us feel as opposed to what it requires. Now, you've spoken of some things there. It's mind-blowing that we live in a world where it's necessary to remind people that a kindness can be saying hello to someone. good morning, whatever the case may be. So when we're talking about this in the context of not thinking about happiness, as you said, only in terms of what it gets us, but in terms of what it does for others and therefore what it does for us, that's a huge shift for me. Do you
Mhm.
find in your experiences day to day, and you talk with a lot of people, I know that you lecture on these things, and of course you do it professionally every day, but how have you found the ability to think in that way, something that you can apply in all those varieties of categories in which you operate, personal, professional, um, avocational, all of these things. And what is the response that you're getting in deploying that approach as it relates to other people? Because you're teaching people along the way. That's part of what you said. You and I have a kind of connection because of what we've seen. So you've taught me some things, the whole pink socks things, and feel free to talk about that too. But
Sure.
you're always in the position where you never know who's watching what you're doing and what they're doing with it. But this ability to actually help others defining our own happiness, how does that strike you?
Yeah. So again, let's unpack this a little bit. So for me, I think that the foundation of happiness, as we've kind of already set the groundwork
Right.
for, is something I just do. I just something that I just do
Mm-hmm.
every single day. I think part of what I've found that really works for me, and I've been speaking about, talking about, and continuing to kind of adapt my own thinking on, Charles, is, we talk a lot about work-life balance, and you
Mm-hmm.
said it well. How do these things begin to blend together,
Right.
especially in light of the past 18, 20 months together?
Mm-hmm.
I've really been advocating for and practicing like this whole, like, it all becomes like, put it all in the soup, put work in the soup, put life in the soup, put your personal life in the soup, so to speak. And again, this has got to work for you, but what's
Right.
worked really well for me,
Mm-hmm.
the common through line of all this stuff is like, do the things that make you happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's going for a walk, cool, let's go on time
Mm-hmm.
with your family,
Mm-hmm.
you know giving your dime, your money, fine, whatever that is. But for me, the underpinning of all this stuff is scrapping work-life balance
Mm-hmm.
and making it, I'm looking for a better word. So maybe after this conversation, we'll find a better word for work-life integration that just sounds too transactional,
Right. Right.
sounds too consultant-y,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that thing is. Like, it's like this like melting pot
Mm-hmm.
of how do we become more seamless and like transitioning from work into our daily lives and then back again without having to like put it aside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say that because that has been something that's been really, it was niggling at my mind, for years. And, now that I'm home with my boys and I'm spending time obviously in front of this computer so much, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not just getting outside and actually just taking a step away from work. Maybe I'm going to get a coffee with a friend, but I'm actually taking a meeting on the way there.
Mm-hmm.
All of this stuff, like that energy that I don't have to like compartmentalize my life, Charles, has become kind of like part of the new ethos, right? The new piece of how I think about happiness.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to this thinking of work-life integration in the past couple of years and making it real, I have a lot more energy. I'm much happier because what I'll tell you that I've found is that I felt like I was spending too much energy on trying to make other people happy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't mean that like I try to make my boss happy,
Right.
make my clients
Right.
happy, make my wife happy, so to speak. But when I just like, you can't make others happy until you yourself are happy,
That's
right?
right.
And that's kind of just maybe my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
When I kind of got rid of the balancing act and became much more kind of fluid and dynamic and adaptable to kind of throw some things out there, I found that I was much more happy. And I think even my wife said to me, she's like, "You've been home now for 18 months. You got off the road. Like you got a lot of more energy. You're a lot more happy. You're kind of coming downstairs more. You're not just kind of locked in your office forever." So I say that because I guess maybe for me, I'm not even trying now. And people are coming to me, my wife especially, saying like, "Hey, you seem, you got more energy. You're happy."
Mm-hmm.
People, I would say that, have been a part of my life yourself, right? So you and I know each other, but we've spent zero time outside of what we were in an office. Clearly, I'm doing something that you've seen, and I appreciate that more than you know. I'm just being me, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you do that too. And I think it's people like listen to this and like, well, I'm just doing me. Like, yeah, you do you. Keep doing what you do. But I guess the big thing for me is I've been experimenting. I've been trying new things. I'm putting new things on LinkedIn that have nothing to do with business, right?
Right.
I'm putting things out into the world that have nothing to do with the context with which you usually see these things. That's experimentation, Charles, and that seems to be it's a lot of fun for me. I think people are receptive to that.
I think you've hit on something really important. I'm sitting here just grinning ear to ear because of it, because, we are so often compelled to believe that it's important to fit in. to be aligned with everybody else. I always tell folks, you know, the hardest fight you're ever going to have to fight in your life is the right to be yourself, right?
That's right.
And when you're saying that you are happier by being yourself, and by default, the people around you, the people who are in your life, are interestingly happier as well because they like you more, right? It tells you everything. And yet we still find ourselves being concerned with stepping too far out of the lines when it comes to what is allowed. And I kind of
Yeah.
am in a point right now, of course, I've been here for years, where I have just said, you know, let the chips fall where they may. This is who I
Hmm.
am, take it or leave it. And every time I do that, I can walk in authenticity, in self awareness, and I bring that to the nature of every relationship and circumstance I
Hmm.
find myself in. And when it comes to happiness, as you're talking about that, the comments from the wife are very important to me because that's your real litmus test right there. So,
That's it.
as we are talking to other people who believe that their happiness is defined by what others think of them, talk to me somewhat more about this importance of self awareness and self actualization as it relates to who you become, because I think that's another aspect of what people tend to forget, Larry. You're not the same person you were 5 years ago. You're not going to be the same person you are today, 5 years from now, and so on. So, in terms of this constant evolution, where we are becoming who we're intended to be, talk to me a little bit more about that understanding when it comes to being exactly yourself and not worrying what the world thinks about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this conversation, Charles, for all the reasons, because we could just unpack every one of these questions. So this for me again, I'll come coming back to my family because when you and I worked together, I was a
Right.
young father then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now here I am with two boys, and it has become so central to who I am, right? And some of our listeners, they may not be parents yet, maybe not. They've got spouses, they've got partners, whatever that is. So for me, the anchor point in the past few years for me, and kind of continuing my own evolution of happiness, is putting my family front and center,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I make it very real for you in light of what you know me to be as a consultant, as an advisor, kind of where I still work. Because I made a very conscious decision a few years ago to not put my career on hold, Charles,
Mm-hmm.
but to really not put it on hold, but to take the pause on the trajectory I was on and focus on my family. Nothing was bad, but it's really good, but now it's even better.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was making a conscious decision around my values and saying, hey, as a young guy, young single guy, kind of growing up in a very fast paced, kind of up or out kind of environment,
Mm-hmm.
my trajectory was I'm going to be a partner. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to bank a lot of money and just do my thing. Well, you know what? And everyone listening to this, something happens in their life.
Mm-hmm.
The good things, the bad things, all the good things in my life was my family, first my wife, and now my kids. That changed my trajectory. And I was very intentional about the value of not putting my work first and those I love first. So for me, the kind of first answer to that, if you will, is kind of resetting and reevaluating my, not values, but my priorities, right? My values haven't changed. My values, I think, similar to yours, are obviously health. If I'm not healthy, then I can't, do the things we want to do. My relationships, right? Then kind of cascading that into the people that I love and continue to build community, right? So they're kind of three of my core values. Those values haven't changed. But what I continue to do is to prioritize where I put my energy, and which then kind of, I haven't said happiness, right? In the past 2 minutes, those things manifest into my own personal happiness, which then are reciprocated into taking time on a Saturday with you because I want to spend time with you, not about the podcast, but about being able to have this conversation. Because that to me, I get a lot. I can't even see you. And I get so much energy from this conversation, right? That to me is how I continue to adapt, evolve my own priorities, Charles, in the past few years. And the last thing I'll say is I've taken a whole different stance on work. Work used to define me, and work does not define me, especially in light of the world we're living in right now. And you look at all the jobs that talk about the future of work and kind of the jobs that weren't there 5 years ago. I can't write my own ticket. I know that. But I sure as hell have a whole lot more agency over what I can do now than what I had to do, could do 5 years ago. And that's not lost on me. And frankly, it's not lost on my company either. Hence, they've given me a lot of not a lot of rope, but a lot of leeway
Mm-hmm.
to do what I want to do in light of all the things we talked about. Does that
Mm-hmm.
help? Make some sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. I totally relate to it. Um, I always tell people it's sometimes when you're going through processes and you are looking for new work and everything, and they always inevitably ask that question: Have you ever been fired or such and such from a job? It's like, no, but I've left a lot of them, and that is the truth. I mean, the biggest one was a company that I literally thought that I was going to be taken out of feet first. Was purchased by other people. The culture shifted. It wasn't for me any longer. It was so bad, Larry, that even though I was located in an entirely different state, being on the telephone with people, having to hear all of that yin yang, made me physically ill. And I had to leave for my own well
Mhm.
being. I am a person who finds catharsis in writing about everything. And I wrote about it and I titled it Giving Up a Paycheck and Getting a Life. Because during that time after I left, it's similar to the journey you've taken in a number of different ways. I took the time off. I took a year. I wrote my first book. I
Mhm.
went back and I spent time with family and friends because I was a workaholic. I mean, I was
Mhm.
being rolled down the hospital hallway on the way to surgery once, and I was on the phone with my boss going over work. I was obsessed.
No.
When I stopped doing that, I found myself. And when I found myself, like you, I found my path to happiness. As I work now, I tell people all the time, I work on my own terms. If the day
Mhm.
comes you don't like what I'm doing, just tell me. I will take my briefcase and take my black ass home. Okay? I'm not going to fight with
Well,
you. I'm not going to be upset about it. It is what it is because I subscribe to a belief that it's going to be okay no matter what. And that's what I think really essentially speaks to that individualization when it comes to happiness. It is for each of us something different, but ultimately the same. We know what works for us and we choose what we're going to pursue. Fair?
yeah, it's very fair. Can I actually piggyback off of that for a
Yeah,
second?
go
Because
ahead, please.
I think a lot of what I think there's a not a misconception, but happiness. There's happiness in life, happiness in
Mm-hmm.
work, happiness in obviously just like the world we live in, right? Getting
Right.
back to kind of creating that. I think that one of the things that's really important that I've continued to learn and evolve and kind of
Right.
tying this whole thing of personal happiness to leadership
Mm-hmm.
is how do we not just put ourselves out there? How are we showing up, right?
Right.
But how are we transparent and understanding what makes other people tick, right? So I
Right.
know you've led a lot of large teams, and as have I, and I'm continuing to kind of learn from the people in my organization and other organizations. But one of the things that I've found that works extremely well, no matter who's listening to this, if you're a CXO from the boardroom to the server room, all right, I'm an
Mm-hmm.
IT guy.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where you are, I think one of the things that we can all stand to learn from is that when we open up and we actually have candid conversations, I'm not even talking about being an extrovert. I'm just talking about like sharing heart speak with each other. Like, hey,
Right.
here's what I do. You do it great. You,
Mm-hmm.
you do it so well. Hey, here's who I am. If you don't like it, then we got to figure something out.
Exactly.
But when you have that conversation with somebody, now it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
They know where you're coming from. And frankly, it's one thing. I think too many people, Charles, just do the one-way thing. They're like, hey, this is who I am. If you don't like it, tough shit. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I can say that on your
Mm-hmm.
podcast
Mm-hmm.
because you
You
said it
can.
first.
Yeah.
But
You can say a
but
lot
now is the
more.
time. I'm sure you do. But now is the time to listen, right?
Right.
Now you've given your piece, but then when we listen to other people, now you're giving them the opportunity to actually share their world
Mm-hmm.
with you. That creates something I know you and I are very passionate about: human connection.
Mm-hmm.
When we listen, listen more, talk less, and when we create that bond or connection that we all know what's going on now with each other, I think that creates a world of happiness for each of us as individuals, and frankly, it creates that happiness in the workplace that
Mm-hmm.
so many people are striving for. And I think one of the things they're missing or not doing is listening a little more versus just telling people how they feel or telling people what they want to do, right?
Right. Right.
Just I just wanted to add that in there because so many people they seem to try to think about happiness as only what they do outside of
That's
work. And I
right.
think it can be so much more than that.
That's right. And I do get a great deal of energy from what you're saying to me because I know for sure, I know for sure that I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you come from. Ultimately, when the measures are gauged, everyone wants to know that they've been seen, that they've been heard, and that they matter. That's ultimately what everybody wants. Now they may manifest that differently. Some people are out there, screaming in a bullhorn. Some people are on TikTok. I don't know. It's a lot of different ways people do it. But that's the reason they're doing it, and they may not be aware of that. So getting to that point where you're aware of what it is that you want and why you do what you do is so essential. And I want, to ask you this too, particularly as the father now of two sons, and granted, they're still young, there's an awesome responsibility there, particularly when it comes to being the mirror that they're using to define for themselves what happiness is. What is that like?
Wow. Yeah. So for me, I've been obviously much more. I've always been very intentional. We always had this saying in the business world that I had no appreciation for as not being a father then, that, the children will do what their parents do. And I'm like, oh, great. Yeah. So we're going to do something. And then obviously the rest of the people will follow. And just given your background as an expert communicator and change agent, I had no real appreciation for what that little slogan meant. And now here I am. The children will do what their parents do.
That's right.
Cannot be anything more than the truth, right?
That's exactly.
So here I am. Like, one of the things I was talking with Maria about this, my wife, yesterday, is that, getting back to the engineered piece, my son now at the time of this recording of the podcast is 3.5 years old, and he's a sponge. His name is Luca, and he just absorbs so much. And we have started in the past year and a half now, kind of this daily affirmation. And it's very simple. And I say this to you because it's very real and something I've just started with my kids as an experiment. And he says, we say every day before he goes to school or goes to, hangs out with a nanny, is I say, I am, and he knows what he has to say. So I'm cool. This is him saying this. I am cool,
right.
Dad. I am smart. I am kind, and I am strong. And today is going to be, and he says, it's going to be a great day. I am cool. I am smart. I am kind. I am strong.
Awesome.
And today's going to be a great day. So, that feels very engineered, but I've thought about this in such a way that, hey, it could be 7 more words, right? What are you? But those 4 things for me, the bond that I've created with my kids, and I look back on it and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I believe all those things. I want him to believe that too. And you know what? Hopefully over time, he will never forget those things, but maybe he'll have 5 of his own things and he'll pass on to his little brother, right? So this idea of affirming these things. Right. I've never really spent the time to do that myself in earnest. And now here I am saying that and sharing that with my kids. I think it's kind of become a thing now. It's something that, I want to do myself. Like I'm sharing this with my kids as a way to kind of make sure that they grow up with a, very thoughtful, open mind to the world. And for me, Charles, is, so now how do I bring that back as a father to share with other parents?
Right.
I joined some, make this very real too. I joined some mastermind groups. I don't have all the answers. No parent has all the answers by any means, but we live through experiences. And when we can share those experiences, kind of the underpinning of this conversation with other, in this case, other dads who are doing it for the first time. I don't have the blueprint, but I can tell you what works and what doesn't work. And things like that tend to work for me and my kids. Maybe it works for you and your kids. I've found that kind of joining community, back to my other kind of value is community, joining communities and putting these things back out there. And frankly, when I go into these things from a place of, hey, I have something to share, but I also have something to learn. I'm a student of life like you are, right? And that's something I've really kind of latched onto now, kind of bringing all this stuff, work, life, family, all together in the past couple months, the past years and now months, especially with my kids now 3.5, 18 months. It's been amazing.
It's I don't have kids.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to people who are better at it. But the thing is, I realize the awesome responsibility of it, and grounding your children in the certainty of who they are before someone else defines that for them, I think is essential for personal growth and development, because we had been working, I think, under a model, Larry, where we kind of send the kids out into the world and we let everybody else tell them who they are, from the various sources at school and, in terms of the other kids that they're dealing with or other people. But giving them the gift of saying, no, you are defining for yourself who you are and how you are on a daily basis changes how they will grow into being able to discern for themselves what their important level of awareness is, wherever they are, whomever they're with, right? And we didn't do that. We didn't grow up with that.
No, we didn't. I guess when I grew up with and I say this because my dad may be listening to this podcast eventually, but he's not just my mentor, my father, one of my best friend, right? And he always, to this day, he still says this. And he says, Larry, you always had choices.
Right.
You always had choices.
Mm-hmm.
I just controlled the choices up to a
Mm-hmm.
certain point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving you, again, I love the word agency, not for the sake of just a word, but it's not even choice, it's agency. Like, you're going to choose, and frankly, whatever comes out of that decision, you're going to live with it. Right.
Right.
Thereby getting back to defining your happiness. Things that you choose aren't going to go the right way. They're going to make you sad. It's going to feel sucky inside. Right. But there's things, a lot of things you're going to do that I'm giving you the choice to make that you're going to feel really good about. And now you carry that with you as a young adult into your adulthood, into your work life, into the relationships you develop. That's what I'm really excited about in being a father and tying this whole bow together of giving people choice, as you said, and continuing to create agency with other people. I think is the root of happiness.
I think, it's not objective because I already like you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be having you on the podcast. But I think you're certainly on the right path. And, my whole dynamic here, PooleProof Wisdom, that is literally what I call it, because I got all of what I have learned predominantly from my mom. Now, she's no longer with us, but, she was the salty type. She didn't cut corners, and she told you exactly what it is. And let me ask you about that in terms of the relationships from the parental standpoint as well, because the way that I was raised is, while my mom didn't, quote, protect me from things in the sense that she would not tell me the truth or be authentic about what was going on, she protected me in a sense that as I grew into agency, I'm going to use that word, I was very clear on the realities of the world in which I lived and the expectations I could set for myself and others as a result. Now, a lot of times parents are kind of more of the mind, well, no, I don't want them to know that. They're too young. They shouldn't be dealing with that right now. But I was talking with a friend recently, and they were talking about maturation levels. I said, I have been an adult since I was a kid because I never looked at life from the perspective of that all I was supposed to do is have this, free time. Without going into too much detail, there was a lot of reasons why that wasn't possible. But a lot of folks may look up on that and say, oh, that's so sad you didn't have a child. I was like, no, I had a great childhood. I just grew up a lot faster. And as a result, it set me up so that I could see the world in a different light. Now, as a parent, you, of course, have that challenge. What do you, quote, protect them from? Or what do you let them understand so that they have that ability to go forward and grow in the real world, fully prepared for what is? Because let me say one more thing on that. The first thing that I remember when I was old enough to understand, I guess, is that, my mom used to always tell me that the world isn't fair, but it's still here for you to choose how you're going to live in it. That's an important lesson. So you and your wife have these two boys who are going to be here as the world is going God knows where, right? What do you open up to them in terms of their worldview, and what don't you, and why? And how is that going to dovetail into the level of happiness that you hope, because we have no control over it, that you hope that they discover for themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe a blessing in disguise is that my guys are pretty young, right? In light of what's going on, I have so much, I say empathy for it. I can only imagine what it's like explaining to a teenager who understands a lot of what's happening in the world right now, right? And they ask those kind of questions. How do you explain that? So I guess I haven't had, I don't want to say the luxury of, or fun of having to explain to my 3.5-year-old what's happening in the world, or my 18-month-old, right? So this kind of context setting. However, here we are recording this on September 11th, 2021.
Right.
You're right. This is a very reflective day for the world and for the United States. And, when we woke up this morning and had breakfast, and I'm on NPR, and my son hears this stuff, and he's like, well, these moments of silence, Dad, what's going on? Like, why do we see flags everywhere? Obviously more so than we saw the past couple of weeks. That's important to talk about. So yes, to answer the question is, when my son asks a question, I'm not going to shun away from it, because clearly he is curious, and he's a very curious kid. But if he's curious enough to actually articulate a question, whether it's, comprehensive or not, or comprehensible or not, he needs to know. And I will answer the question thoughtfully, and, with no kind of, I would say kind of no sugarcoating. So we had that conversation and we talked about kind of what it means to be, an American and what's happening in our world 20 years ago as of today. And he think he understood a little bit, but he really didn't understand. So he asked. So short of the long for the first piece, Charles, is when my children ask, I will tell them. Similarly, it comes back again. It's the thematic here or repetitive nature of agency is I'm going to give my kids exposure to everything. And I think one of the things that I've learned in the kind of this cliche mantra of like, oh, you're a helicopter parent, which is like you're always over top of them and you don't want them to like get hurt. The antithesis to that, and my father laughs at me when I talk about kind of free range children. We're not throwing our kids out in the street and saying, like, okay, guys, we'll see you when the sun comes out. Which, by the way, was me growing up. I'll see you when the sun comes down, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of in the middle. We're in the middle, right? In as much as look, I will always protect my children from physical harm.
Right.
Okay. And you would expect that.
Yeah.
But the case in point, I warn you, I'm like, Luca, you're going to fall. I'm letting you know. Now, falling a foot versus falling 5 feet is very different. Again, it comes back to me, like my father taught me, is to control those choices. I'm going to let you fall a foot because I want you to feel what it feels like. I would never obviously pose harm to my kids, right? But I'm using this as an example to say like, okay, it's falling a foot off the monkey bars today, but maybe it's in a year, like, okay, in a couple of years, we're going to start applying to, private schools or colleges or whatever. You have some choices, but there's some repercussions to that. Like maybe in this case, there may be some choices that you have to think about here relative to hurting a little bit. Right. So I will always, in this case, I'm not control the pain, but I'm not averse to say, no, don't do that. Right. Because if we don't feel, I don't mean to say pain, but if we don't feel pain or we don't feel sorrow or we don't feel, then we never know. Because then when we're adults, I've seen this, right? And I think, when someone feels pain for the first time when they're an adult, it's a very different experience and frankly becomes kind of all encompassing. And I say that because I just don't want my kids to grow up that way. And that's kind of the thesis of how I'm right or wrong being a parent. That's kind of the second piece is kind of never let my kids kind of feel pain, but I'll just control. Right. I think the other piece, Charles, is going to go back to my kids, like giving them choices. But frankly, it comes back to letting them be kids. My wife has to remind me often, and I have to kind of step back, is like, I want them to do so many things and be so successful. At the time of this recording, I'm just going to voting father for a second. Luca got accepted to Carnegie Mellon, and that's like a big deal as the children's school, right? And
yes,
that's
it is.
I went to grad school, right? And now I wanted to start preparing for school and reading books. And he's just like, let him be a kid. He's 3.5. I have to remind myself.
Right.
So for those listening who are parents or want to be parents or soon to be parents, let them just be kids. Because I look back on my childhood, my parents let me be a kid, and I learned a lot. I got stubbed toes and dirty, and that's part of being a kid. And frankly, the last thing, Charles, is let's never lose that childhood, let's never lose that childlike wonder, right? As adults, because if we let our kids be kids when they're truly at the age of being a kid, then they it's a part of this creative side of things. Now here we are as adults, as leaders. I love that we get so caught up in work. Can we just go be kids again and be creative and screw around and have fun and no repercussions? Come on, we need more of that.
Yeah. I'm with you. It's daunting to contend with environments and circumstances where people tend to forget what we're capable of and only seem driven by what we are supposed to want, right? This desire for, I've gotten to the point where I literally don't like people using the word success around me because it's kind of like an ice pick in my skull, because this definition of it is so archaic and so one-sided that it's impossible to comprehend how anyone can think themselves successful when allegedly being that costs them so much in terms of joy and a sense of possibility. And when I'm looking at the world now, and particularly for younger people, because I've gotten to that point where I feel like I'm kind of the Jurassic age, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm level 50. Well, it's not that I feel it in a bad way. It's just that when I look back, I see the gaps in what's being missed out on by so many who are much younger than me. I mean, I remember when I was coming up, for instance, granted, I wasn't born in the 20s and 30s, but I knew the music because I was introduced to it by my parents and I understood it. I tell people a story, Larry, that, and it was years ago when this song came out, but there was a song once that Kanye West put out that featured Rihanna and Paul McCartney. And introduced to a group of young people at that time, they said how cool it was that Kanye gave that old guy a chance to show what he could do. I'm like,
Little
don't,
little do they know.
yeah, I'm like, you've got to know your history. You've got to know experiences before you. And as I'm looking at the younger generation when it comes to happiness, as well as the older generation, which it's a interesting dynamic because younger folks, and this isn't an indictment of everyone who's younger, but a lot of younger folks don't have any appreciation for all the good that has come before them. And a lot of older folks don't have an appreciation of all the good that lies ahead of them. And as a result, they get to this point where they're longing for the past or ignoring it altogether, right?
Mm.
And that's the reason I think a lot of people just aren't happy with things because while I believe in living in the now, if you aren't being aware of the now without context and appreciation of
Mm.
that context, you just can look around and you can say, yeah, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And that's not a perspective that certainly drives happiness. So that's the reason I want to think about this kind of topic is because if we are doing that, we have to find ways to get beyond it. Now, we talked about children, we talked about choices, we've talked about the importance of having agency. But let's talk now a little bit about something that a lot of people say they have, but I don't know that they actually know what it means either. Let's talk a little bit about how faith plays into that. Because we have this spiritual component that infuses this physicality that we embody in a way that helps keeps us on track. Everything you've talked about, family, friends, relationships, these types of things, there's a faith-based aspect to it. Talk about it from your perspective, and then, if comfortable, talk about it in the perspective of what we're seeing going on in the world right now. Are people still able to tap into that, you think? Or are they giving up a sense of faith for a sense of acknowledgement that comes from other forms beyond something that's inside and bigger than us? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you asked some big questions, which I
I
expected
try.
nothing else. But this is awesome. This is awesome. So for me, you know, grew up as my family was I would say faith-based family. But one of the things my father says, he says this very candidly, he says if there's any area of me being my father in raising you where I let you down, which was I failed in the category of 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 faith
Mm-hmm.
and into religion specifically,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he doesn't call it a failure, but he's like, if there's anything I didn't do, with the same level of rigor was around kind of you kind of understanding what your faith is and your religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that as a basis of like, yes, I am a religious man, and now having just married a wife who came from and is practicing Catholicism,
Mm-hmm.
and raised a Catholic, and I was as well, but didn't go through all the things that she did. Married in the Catholic Church, here we are now, have both of our sons got baptized, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's important, so from that angle of faith, from a truly religious angle, which most would associate, I'm a man of faith and continue to evolve my own, not just thinking, not that it's like wavering, but committed to what it means to believe in God, and how we put belief in God, put belief in that he as a higher being is going to help us all the things that we do, and praying. So yes, I'm a man of faith in that regard. I think it's also important, similarly, Charles, and I think what often gets overlooked is having faith, not just in a higher being, but a faith in yourself, and a faith in those you love, and a faith in those you surround yourself with, right? Which is not even a religious thing. It's just the self-awareness that I want to spend time and share energy and share space with you because I believe in you, and I know you believe in me, right? And so that, to kind of get real personal here, is that I do that because I put faith in people. You're going to do the right thing, and I'm going to do the right thing for you. We're going to do the right thing together. So the all-encompassing faith on the religious side of things, and kind of just putting faith in each other, is kind of how I encompass kind of faith, and frankly, kind of the world at large, right? Which is kind of your second part of your question. I think what's happening now is, I think more now than ever, people are putting a lot of faith in the religious meaning of what faith is, and I think it should be the right thing. Absolutely. Are they putting their are they putting the faith in trusting, and let's be honest here, I'm not going to get into a political conversation, but are we putting faith in science? Unfortunately, I don't think that we are as a world, as a nation, like we probably should be. Again, everyone's got their opinion. I think I'm a data guy. I know you're a data guy too. I don't think we're putting enough faith in this case, science, as we probably should be, or in this case, one person's opinion. I don't think we're putting enough faith in humanity, how we even started this conversation, that there actually is a whole lot of good in the world. And all we see, as we're bombarded with, is, what we see in the media, we hear in the media, and, now the through line, whenever this is published and for years to come, will be, all misinformation or disinformation. It's a thing in social media, right? We're not putting a lot of faith in each other and trusting each other right now, unfortunately. I think we have to do more. We have to do better. People listening to this, kind of, how can we inculcate faith in each other? You don't have to believe what I believe, but how can we just talk to each other as humans and put aside truly our differences of what we truly believe, and this, can we just hear each other out? We're not doing a lot. We're not doing enough of that, Charles. I see it. I think when we do see it, it's the proverbial kind of timeline cleanser.
Yeah.
Right. And you said you're like, you kind of stepped away from social, but because of those things, because it just inundates us. So I think we need more timeline cleansers, so to speak. We need more acts of truly kindness and humanity that aren't random. They shouldn't be random. We should just be doing these things for each other because we actually care, because we put faith in each other, we believe each other, we trust each other. I would have to. So maybe a roundabout way of saying, I think we as a society, we as a people, we as just the human race have a lot of work to do when it comes to, especially right now, what's happening in the world, of putting more faith in each other, believing there's good in the world, and always leading with someone is doing something with the right intent, not assuming based on, dare I say, how they look, how they talk, where they're from, what they're wearing, their accent.
Right.
And this is stuff we're living with every single day. I think too many people are leading with, I don't trust you, I don't have faith in you because of what you look like, what you sound like, what you're telling me. That's we need more of the opposite, which is I'm gonna trust you until proven otherwise. I think that's what's really kind of great. Again, easier said than done, and you and I know that. Now here we are, kind of lowering this conversation a bit. I think we need a whole lot more. I think we need a lot more of that in the world. And I think it's going to take people like you, people like me, and all of your listeners to do a little nudging with each other and hear each other out. Right. I think it's the only way we're going to get there.
Well, I'm loving hearing that. By the way, you are just awesome on this podcast. I'm enjoying this conversation. I believe in the each one can help one, mentality. I really do. It's the reason I do what I do. People, will reach out and, are you trying to monetize this? Like, I'm not making money off this. In fact, I'm spending money on it. Right, guys, in the podcast booth? I'm spending money on it because I have a belief that it's part of my purpose, and I am bound and determined to serve that purpose. Now, when it comes to faith, everything that you said before reminds me of something. It always does, that my mama said. She used to say, baby, isn't it interesting that people buy into the idea that God created everything, but then they decide which ones are the right ones? Right? When you look at it from that perspective, it really gives you pause if you are truly trying to be here for humanity. Because how can you then say everything was created and then say, well, that one doesn't work for me, or this one's this way? Once I was able to embrace that, it changed my entire worldview. When I was growing up, I grew up in a neighborhood where everybody looked like me. The teachers, the business owners, everybody. And when I was getting ready to go to college finally, and I've told this story before, my high school counselor was trying to get me to go to an HBCU. And she kept pressuring me because she was trying to get me to go to actually her alma mater, and I won't mention that. But eventually, she just kept pressuring me so much, and I'm the kind of guy, you've met me, when it gets to a certain point, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. So I blurted out, Mrs. Blank, I've seen enough black people. I need to see somebody else. And that's the reason I went to a school that, though it was in my neighborhood, because I couldn't afford to go away, but it was in my city, it was a global campus. It changed everything. And it was the foundation on which I was able to build an understanding that, much like you, made me a humanist, as opposed to a person who subscribed to one belief or another. And that's what I think is important, Larry, as we're talking about and about to wrap up on the context of the future of happiness. I think that it comes down to exactly this: each person doing what they can from where they can to help someone else perhaps see the world or embrace the world and the people who are in it in a different way. How would you, okay, thinker, creative person, put that in the context that applies to everything you've spoken about in terms of happiness?
Yeah, I mean, well, how do you like bottle that up? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me, it comes down to, I think the one thing, well, you didn't ask for one thing, but I'll kind of maybe encapsulate
Yeah, go
how do
ahead.
we move forward as a people, as an individual, in a society, in a world with all of these different, the diversity of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't want to stymie all that because it's all goodness. It's all good. Easily said to put aside our differences and let's have a conversation and listen to each other. But I think what's really going to be differentiating and for us as a takeaway from this conversation is how do we continue to adapt?
Mm.
We get so stuck in our ways because it was the way that we were raised. It was because of the way that, we were taught. Well, the world doesn't slow down. And anybody knows this, it's you. And you just for your own personal story, you've continued to adapt your own style, what you believe in. Frankly, beliefs can change,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially with what's happening, not just in the world, but we have to be adaptable.
Mm.
And I think that will be, if I think about the future of happiness, it's rooted in adaptability.
Mm.
I talk often about what it means. That's a skill set that obviously applies to work. That's like, we can have a whole conversation about the
Absolutely.
future of work. But I think this adaptability comes from a place of, I'll just say it again, is maybe you weren't a really good listener 2 years ago, but now here we are. And if we're not listening, you're just going to get shut out, especially in the digital world.
Mm.
You got to listen more, right? This idea of maybe you were quiet pre-pandemic, or you were more, not I'm saying an introvert must become an extrovert, but the adaptation to speaking up, having a voice. I do a lot with women in technology and coaching and mentoring women as they kind of grow in their careers in technology. How do they adapt to showing up differently? Talk a lot about showing up. Maybe it's an adaptation to your voice, maybe in your how you show up as a person, where you show up, right? So adapting where you show up now in a digital world. Before it was we were in the office and okay, Larry was physically there, Charles was physically there, but now in a digital world, where are you showing up? And how are you showing up, right? I think this kind of going with the through line of adaptation is, what are you saying? What are you putting out there? How are you showing up? Where are you showing up? What are you putting out there? I have adapted, let's just use the LinkedIn. I'm not sure if we can kind of, make references here on this. It sounds like we can. So
yeah,
LinkedIn,
we can. You can say anything.
Yeah. I mean, look, let's put this. You reached out to me. Obviously, we've been in touch over the years, back and forth, and not lost touch. But you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and I don't think it was something maybe it was something I posted. I talk a lot about on LinkedIn what most people don't talk about, which is bringing empathy into the business world. Ooh, wait, that's kind of like we don't talk about that. But here we are now. Everyone's talking about it. I definitely wasn't the first one. I did a lot of that. 2 years ago. Are we adapting what you're talking about, and dare I say, being a little more courageous, challenging the status quo, adapting all the things? And frankly, I don't mean adapting to change. What I'm saying here, and I make sure our listeners understand this, is being adaptable does not mean changing because someone told you to, or someone wants you to change. Your boss wants you to change, so you adapt. The world wants you to think a different way, so you adapt. I'm talking about having the facility to be introspective, to say, hey, if something comes my way, an opportunity, I'm going to adapt and I'm going to learn something new. Or something happens in my personal life, I'm going to adapt and change. This whole thing of adaptability, I think, for me, Charles, kind of, if I can answer your question, is kind of what the future of happiness is about. Because if we don't adapt, we will be sad because things didn't go our way. We will be, I think, maybe down on ourselves because we didn't deliver like we thought we were. Because frankly, delivering something, whether it's a project or an idea or a concept or a talk or a podcast, 18 months ago is going to be very different today, and quite frankly, very different 18 months from now. So I don't know how that lands with you. Maybe react to that, but adaptability is kind of my name of the game going forward.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I call it adapt or be unhappy. And that's pretty much the way
Well,
it's going to be. And I
okay.
think you've hit it exactly on the head because we tend to want to externalize these things, but it's an internal thing.
Mm,
As we, round out here, Larry, the thing that I always endeavor to do. Uh, a lot of times people say, hey, you're a happy guy. You seem to be in a good mood. What's the secret? I said, well, there's no secret. I said, I am happy every day I wake up. The first thing I think when I wake up in the morning is thank you because I know what the
mm.
alternative is. I'm not always happy all day, every day, right? But I'm happy every day. Those moments that happen are transitory, and then I let them go. So as we close out here, I wanted to remind people that you speak, you do a lot of different things. If people want to know more about what you have to say on all of these variety of topics and all the different ways they can reach you, give us some details on how they can reach out to you directly if you're comfortable.
No, I appreciate that, and thanks for the opportunity to do so. Yeah, so most of what I do is kind of just be putting ideas into the world, right?
Mm.
Like you, but you're just codified into the books and podcasts. I'm just not nearly to your level yet, but I appreciate that. So for me, the kind of digital coordinates for me is you can find me on social, LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. So I think we'll have some show notes here, Charles. Larry Gioia on LinkedIn, Gioia, or on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter as well, and my handle there is at LGin412. You'll find me on Twitter in a kind of, again, personal, professional context. You'll see pictures of my kids on there.
It's
The next
okay.
tweet will be about the next tweet will be about what's happening in the world of remote work.
That's
And
awesome.
the next tweet will be about kind of what's going on in Pittsburgh. So that's kind of a mishmash. But on LinkedIn, you can find me there, pretty active. Twitter for sure. Um, and then I'll share my email, your personal email, in the show notes with you, Charles.
Okay.
I would love to connect with people. And again, I'm an open book,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't offer it up if I really wasn't sincere about it. So I would love to, if your listeners want to follow up and chat more about something. All of my talks that I've given, those that are out in the public are on YouTube.
Hmm.
So they're out there. LinkedIn's the place to
Yeah,
start.
we will share all of that information. And as I said, I think you do know me well enough to know truly if I did not feel and think all these things about you, I would not be talking to you today. So you
No, I
are all that you
know.
seem to be. So I want to thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to spend some time with us. Our audience is certainly going to appreciate it. And there you have it, people. We have the future of happiness, and it's a good discussion point. And Larry has been a wonderful guest. I want to thank you again for spending time with us because ultimately, this is how it all begins. One person, one individual at a time, reaching out to other individuals. So thank you very much, Larry.